welcome to the Line & Girl YouTube channel, and in today's video I'm gonna show you the sew along video for my newest pattern, Daisy, which is a GANNI inspired tie top, and I also have other version of it. The pattern also include a detailed guide on how you can customize the pattern to your preferences. You can do a sleeveless, short sleeve or long sleeve. You can do short dress or midi dress. And you also have other option to make like a V-neck shape instead of a high neck top. Also, all of our dresses include hidden pockets. If you are new to our small business, our patterns are made in a way that you can fully customize to your measurement. So you will have a detailed guide on how to modify the pattern to your cup size or your height, which is very useful. All of that information that will be available for you in more than 40 pages booklet, and the link to my Etsy store will be available below. So what I like about this pattern, the first thing is that where I decided for the tie on the top, I don't like to show too much of my body. So what I did is actually change the placement of the tie. So when you tie the front together, it's actually show no gap in the middle. So before we start sewing, there's a few things that I have to mention to you. The first thing is that in the booklet there is a checklist. I highly recommend using the checklist, especially if you use our pattern the first time. The next thing is that there is a timestamp below, so it's very important. Check the description box. Also use the written instruction in the booklet because English isn't my first language, so sometimes it's easier to write things down rather than doing voiceover. I highly recommend using both the video and the written instruction. Also, you can turn on the subtitle feature. Maybe that will help you understand me a little bit better. If you never used our pattern before, here is a general instruction video that help you learn how to use our pattern step by step. Now, without further ado, let's go straight into sewing. I'm working with a professional seamstress and she using an industrial sewing machine. Most of the time she sewing without having to pin beforehand. If you need to pin before sewing and that provide better result, you definitely should do that. So use your judgment.
Step 1. Cutting the pattern on fabric. To cut the fabric, she folded right side together, so she placed the pattern on the wrong side of the fabric. This will help her do all the marking on the wrong side of the fabric instead of the right one. Before cutting the fabric, you need to pre-wash it in advance. In this video, you can see that she is using a fabric weight to hold the pattern in place, while she used a fabric pen to mark all the notches and the bust dart. Then she also used a scissor to snip very small cut into the edge of the fabric to mark the notches. Later, she flipped to the other side of the front bodice and marked the bust dart also. She do the same for the back body pattern and also for the sleeve pattern. The pen she is using is temporary marker. They are heat removable, so meaning that they're gonna disappear when ironing, so they won't damage the fabric. All the patterns are cut using the same technique. And also for the sleeve pattern, step 2, we're gonna cut the strap, the peplum for the top or the skirt, depend on what you choose to make, and also the bias tape for the neckline. As you can see, there are no paper pattern for them because they are simply cut as a rectangle based on the measurement that you will be provided in the booklet. To cut the bias tape, she find a corner of the fabric and measure 5 cm or 2 inches on both sides. Then she find the middle of the even triangle, and from the corner drawing straight to that point, that would be a 45-degree diagonal line. After having this line as the guideline, she put in the measurement for the bias tape The bias tape, meaning the fabric is cut on cross grain. This ensures the fabric has a lot of stretch to taping around curved line like neckline. Step 3. Sewing the darts. So she starts with the front body on the wrong side of the fabric. She's using a ruler and the fabric pen to mark the notch to the bust point. She also gonna draw a line right in the middle of the dart, so this gonna be the folding line when we sew. Do this for both pieces of the front bodice. On the wrong side of the fabric, she folds the dart in half using the center folding line she just draw before. Make sure that both knots match together and she starts sewing from the bottom up. At the end of the dart, she just let the sewing machine run a few more stitches. This helps the thread naturally twist together and secure the dart without having to backstitch. However, I have never tried this technique on a home sewing machine, so I recommend you tying both threads at the end for extra safety. Using the same technique, sew the dart on the shoulder of the back bodice. Step 4. Sewing the sleeve. With right side together, sew the side seam of the sleeve. Then, finish the raw edges using an overlock stitch machine or a zigzag stitch on a home sewing machine. Now moving to the pressing station, we're gonna press our dart and the side seam of our sleeve. In this video, she's using a dress board ironing tool which naturally has a slight curve on the top which helps all the dart remain its form. For the bust dart, you have to press it up. This helps create a lifted form around the bust on the garment. As you can see, after pressing each dart, she used something called a tailor clapper. In most cases, it's made by hardwood, and this tool helps create crisp, flat seams and creases by absorbing the steam and heat. This sets the fabric in the desired shape. For the side seam of the sleeve, just press everything flat to one side. If you don't have professional tool like her, you can always use something called the tailor hem, which is the similar function but smaller tool that you can buy at the sewing shop and use at home. Step 5. Assembling the back and the front bodies. Put the pattern pieces right side together. Sew the front and the back bodies at the shoulder seam and the side seam. Remember to press the bust dart facing up while sewing. After that, cleaning the edge by running the seam through an overlock machine, or you can do that with a zigzag stitch. Step 6. Sewing the straps. Fold each strap in half, right side together, and sew along the edge. To turn them right side out, the professional seamstress use a needle and thread to loop the strap. If you are a beginner, I recommend using the loop turtle. It makes the process so much easier. I found a tutorial of another YouTuber that has a more detailed video on how to use this tool. Please check it out. I will leave a link down below. Make sure you do the same with all 6 straps. Step 7. Sewing the peplum or the skirt. So if you sew the peplum or the skirt, these steps are identical. The only difference will be the size of the sewing pieces. Obviously, the skirt gonna be a lot bigger. Later in the video, I will show you how to sew an invisible pocket for your skirt. We're not gonna do pocket with the peplum, so we're going to proceed into sew the side seam of the peplum right side together. When attaching the peplum, make sure to sandwich the back peplum panel between the front pieces. For the skirt, after finishing the pocket, you just have to sew the front panel and the back panel right side together on both side seam. Or if you don't do the pocket, you can just leave that step out and sew the side seam right away.
And then we're going to finish the edge with the overlock machine or the zigzag stitch. Then moving on to the pressing station, we're gonna press all the side seam to one side, and we're also gonna use a clapper like I showed you in the previous step. And since we're already in the pressing station, we're also gonna press all the strap flat. Make sure you go slowly and evenly. Step 8, we're gonna sew the hem at the bottom of the peplum on the wrong side of the fabric. Fold the fabric twice. Each fold is about 0.5 centimeter and sew about 0.2 centimeter from the edge. Or you can just think about it as sewing as close to the folding edge as possible. Because she is a professional, that's why she can sew without any pinning. Also, the industrial sewing machine has a way wider table and it has the weight to hold the fabric down, which the home sewing machine doesn't have. If you are new to sewing, make sure you use a pin and press the hem using an iron before sewing. If you are making the skirt, hemming the skirt is also similar technique. However, you're gonna do this step after you finish the pocket. Step 9. Gathering the peplum or the skirt. On the right side of the fabric, on top of the peplum or the skirt, we're gonna do the gathering technique. There are a few different ways you can do gathering. The easiest technique for beginner is sewing a zigzag stitch over another thread. I will link another video talking in detail about this specific technique. I highly recommend that one for beginner. In this video, the seamstress is a professional. She's using the standard method of sewing two lines of basting stitches. Basically, you're gonna adjust the tension on your home sewing machine so the stitches are more loose. And you're gonna sew two lines of stitches. The first one is about 0.5 centimeter from the fabric edge. The second one is about 0.3 centimeter from the first one. And you make sure that both lines of thread are done without any back stitch, and you leave some loose thread for you to pull at the end. I would say this technique is rather more challenging because you have to use high quality thread, or else you will risk the chance of thread breakage while pulling to create the gather. If done slowly and correctly, the gathering can be really tiny and even and look very professional. However, only do this if you are familiar with the technique and you're confident in your skill. If not, just try the zigzag stitch method. It's way easier and also create very professional looking garment. Once you are done, find the midpoint of the peplum by folding in half. So you will find the midpoint on the back panel. Also do the same for the bodice pieces. So fold it in half and you find the midpoint of the back bodice panel. To start sewing, the gathered peplum or skirt are placed on the bottom while the bodies are placed on top, right side together. If you are doing a dress, then you're gonna find the midpoint of the front and back skirt panel, and you're also gonna find the midpoint of the back bodice. The midpoint of the front bodice is already the opening. Before sewing, you might want to use pin to match all these points together, so all side seams are matched together and all the midpoint of the back and the front bodies or peplum or skirt are also matched together accordingly. If you are a beginner, then make sure you use pin to match all these points before sewing. Because she is a professional, that's why she can skip this step. But I highly recommend use pin if you're new to sewing. After gathering, she run everything through an overlock machine to clean up the excess. If you don't have an overlock machine, use a zigzag stitch instead.
Step 8. Sewing the puff sleeve and attaching it to the bodice. So turn the sleeve to the wrong side. Fold 0.5 cm on the bottom of the sleeve. Then sew as close to the outer folding edge as possible, about 0.2 cm. If you need to use a pin to pin the hem before sewing, please do. In this case, the professional seamstress only gonna fold as she goes. Fold again about 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch. Sew as close as possible to the inner folding edge. This will create the casing for our elastic, leaving a small gap at the end to insert the elastic. For this garment, we use a 0.5 cm elastic or about 0.2 inch. The measurement for the elastic is in the booklet. We also need the elastic threader to pull the elastic through the casing. In this video, she is using her own tool, but I will leave another video link on how to use the elastic threader. After finishing pulling the elastic through the casing, ensure the elastic lay flat and doesn't twist. We're gonna overlap the elastic end by 1 cm, 3/8 of an inch, then sew them together securely with mutable back stitching. Stretch the elastic to distribute the gather evenly, then sew the gap close. To prevent the elastic twisting, on the right side of the fabric, mark a few straight lines on top of the elastic and sew this straight line about 0.5 cm in length or 3/16 of an inch. Next step, we're gonna gather the sleeve head. We mark the front, back, and midpoint of the sleeve. All of these are indicated as notches on the pattern. Use a gathering stitch between the front and the back notch. This uses the same technique as the peplum or the skirt mentioned above. And then we're gonna pull the thread so the sleeve head is gathered to the exact measurement for your size that is mentioned in the booklet. Next, we're gonna attach the sleeve to the bodice. First, we're gonna mark the front and the back bodice notches on the armhole. Align the sleeve and the body right side together with the body is on the top of the sleeve. Make sure they are matching at the side seam and the front notches and the back notches are also matched. If you are a beginner, then pin all the points I mentioned above before sewing. Make sure you distribute the gathers evenly and all the points are matched while sewing. Do the same step for both sleeves. After finished sewing, you can clean up the raw edges by using an overlock machine, or if you don't have one, you can use the zigzag stitch on your home sewing machine. Step 11. Sewing the bias tape to the neckline. In this section of the video, I'm gonna show you how to do the bias tape for the high collar neckline. For the V neckline, I'm gonna show you later in this video. First, you need to find the midpoint of the back body neckline by folding the back body in half. Give it a little snip with your scissors. Also, find the midpoint of your bias tape. Pin both of the midpoint together and align the front of the tape with the front of the bodies and make sure that they are both right side together. Again, in this video, my seamstress, she just sew as she go, but I highly recommend you put in a few pins before sewing as a beginner. After sewing, use a scissor to trim the seam allowance to 0.5 cm. Make a small snip along the neckline curve to allow it to lay flat. So you only need to snip around the shoulder point. Then you're gonna top stitch the bias tape down to the seam allowance. Sew as close to the edge as possible, about 0.2 cm or 0.01 inch. Make sure you're pulling on both sides, on both the bodies and the bias tape for a smooth finish. To finish,
fold the bias tape twice by 0.5 cm
and sew as close to the inner folding edge as possible.
About 0.2 cm or 0.01 inch. You can pin before sewing. In this case, she just sew as she goes.
Step 12. Hem the front opening. Fold the hem twice, about 0.5 cm each or 3/16 of an inch. Sew as close to the inner folding edge as possible. If you are a beginner, pin before sewing. Do the same from the top of the neckline till the bottom of the peplum. We're gonna press the gathering seam up while sewing. Do the same for both sides of the front bodice. Step 13, we're gonna attach the straps to the front bodice.
First, you're gonna mark the placement of the strap using the measurement in the booklet. You can see that after finding the position for the first and the last strap, she just folds so she can find the middle point for the middle strap.
To attach the strap, fold at one end 0.5 cm or 3/16 of an inch. Sew a square to secure the strap.
Basically, you need to sew very slowly, and when it's close to the stopping point, you need to stop the machine and use your hand to manually move the needle. When reaching the corner, you need to pull the needle down, then lift the pressure foot up, and then turn the top to sew another line at 90 degrees.
Make sure you backstitch to secure the seam.
Repeat for all 6 straps. To finish the other end, tuck in the strap edge neatly using a thread snipper. Then sew another line on top. If this technique is too tricky, you can also fold at the end and hand stitch.
Step 14 is a final pressing for the garment. This is an important step to improve the garment appearance and fit. To do this step, basically you're just gonna follow the order in which she pressed the garment. Pay attention on how she is using the dress board ironing table and the clapper to finish the seam. For the gathering parts, she never pressed the iron directly on top of it. She only ironing the seam on the top and around the gathering part. Press the iron directly on the gathering part will make it lose all of its puffiness. She also released the steam around the elastic part to shrink the elastic. Step 15. Sewing the bias tape for the V neckline. If you decided to do a V neckline, you're gonna do this step after step 6. We need to finish the bias tape for the V neckline before attaching the peplum or the skirt. You're gonna cut the bias tape for the V neckline according to the measurement in the booklet. Because the bias tape is quite long and we didn't have enough fabric for it, so she cut 2 pieces of fabric, adding 1 cm of seam allowance and sew them together into one long strip of fabric. As usual, you need to fold the bias tape in half and find the midpoint of the bias tape, and also fold the back bodice neckline in half and find the midpoint. When sewing, we're gonna match these 2 midpoints together. Make sure that the body and the bias tape are right side together, because the bias tape that she made is cut in the middle, so the seam allowance is pretty much exposed, and she placed it in the midpoint of the back neckline for visual reason.
At this point in the video, you can see that she folds the back bodice neckline in half and snip to find the middle, and then she matched the seam line in the middle of the bias tape right at that point. After sewing, she used a scissor to trim down the seam allowance to 0.5 cm or 3/16 of an inch. Next, she's gonna cut a few snips into the seam allowance, especially around the shoulder point, to make sure that all the curved lines are flat. After that, she opened up the bias tape, and on the right side of the fabric, she top stitched the bias tape onto the seam allowance. Make sure that you are sewing as close as possible to the seam line, around 0.2 cm or 1/16 of an inch. After that, she turned to the wrong side of the garment and she folded twice. Each fold is about 0.5 cm or 3/16 of an inch, and she sewed as close to the inner folding edge as possible. After finished sewing, she just pressed everything flat using the iron and a dress board ironing tool. Because all the marking for the strap are made with heat removable pen, so she extended the marking to make sure that the heat doesn't remove all the mark. She also shrank the neckline a little bit by pushing the neckline a little bit closer and using the heat and the steam from the iron to shrink it a little. She also used a clapper to secure the seam after. If you have all the tools available, you can do this for both of the curve around the shoulder seam. That's it, and you got yourself a very nice and flat V neckline. And for the tie strap for the front bodice, if you do a V neckline, you only need 4 straps instead of 6, and the placement of the strap is based on your preferences. Step 16, sew the invisible pocket. If you're planning to make a dress with an invisible pocket in the skirt, this needs to be done before step 7. So we need to sew the pocket in first, and we're also going to finish the side seam of the skirt at the same time. The hemming and gathering need to be done after. In this video, you can see that she already do the gathering first, but I recommend you to do the gathering after so it doesn't get in the way of you doing the pocket. I will attach another video which is very easy for you to follow on how to sew an invisible side seam pocket for your skirt, and I highly recommend you check that out. I will not go into detail about the technique in this video specifically because she is using a very professional technique, which is awesome. The final look pretty amazing. However, I do have serious problem with explaining and doing voiceover for this specific part. So I suggest that you check that video out. They use a very beginner-friendly technique, which is a technique that I usually use on my home sewing machine also. But we can also give a moment of appreciation for how pretty the pocket that my seamstress did. I love that. And I will also include the written instruction in the booklet if you want to attempt how to do this specific technique the same way as she is doing now. If you want a sleeveless look, this is how you're gonna do it. Step 17, sewing the bias tape for the sleeveless top or a dress. We're gonna do this step after step number 5. To begin, first we're gonna press all the side seam and shoulder seam to one side. Prepare your bias tape piece. The measurement is already mentioned in the booklet. Before starting to sew, you need to fold the bias tape in half to find the midpoint. Later, you're gonna match this midpoint with the shoulder seam. On the right side of the body, place the bias tape at the side seam at the bottom of the armhole. Fold 1 cm in at the edge before sewing. After you finish, the 1 cm seam allowance at the end gonna overlap the first one, which create a fully clean and neat look. After you're done, trim the seam allowance using a scissor to 0.5 cm or 3/16 of an inch. Next, you're gonna snip a few small cuts into the seam allowance, which help the curve to lay flat. Make sure that you do this snip all around the armhole, about 1 cm apart or 3/8 of an inch. Turn to the right side. Open the bias tape and top stitch the bias tape to the seam allowance on the right side of the fabric. Start at the bottom of the armhole around the side seam where both ends of the bias tape overlap. Fold it twice, about 0.5 cm each time, and then sew as close to the inner folding edge as possible. After you're done, using a dress board ironing tool to iron the seam and using a clapper to secure the seam after. And look how pretty it is. So that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed this little creative endeavor, and I actually really love seeing what you make using my pattern. So please leave a review. You can tag us on Instagram or TikTok, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell button, and also follow us on social media for newest pattern update. Goodbye and see you in the next pattern video.